I will be talking about gambling as an addiction, and I also want to. This is a very topical subject. It is really causing a lot of problems. As most of you know, I have a private practice. I do counsel people for addiction. That is not only addiction and drug dependence, but I also counsel people on marital issues and issues relating to recovery from any form of addiction. I also am an acupuncturist, and I have been using acupuncture to, to treat with a lot of psychological conditions like depression, anxiety, and insomnia, and all of those withdrawal symptoms that sometimes accompany anyone who is trying to recover from alcoholism, drug addiction, or any form of addiction. So this morning, I will be speaking about gambling. This is a two-part program. We will pause in about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll resume again. So that gambling has been an age-old issue. It's a habit that, when I think of being a Hindu, I could go back into the whole story of the Mahabharata, where the Pandavas and the Kauravas actually fought a war that was rooted in, it began with a game of gambling, where the Pandavas actually gambled their entire inheritance and even their wife in a game of chance and lost. Because in that case, clearly there was cheating. As happens, and we have seen, I have, growing up, seen a lot of Western movies where, people will be in a pub, in a saloon gambling, and of course they'll be armed with the guns, and then somebody would want to palm a card or hide a card or cheat, or they could not take the losses. And it didn't only happen in the Wild Wild West. We see it happening even today as we speak. There's a lot of people who can't take the consequences because of their addiction to gambling. They can't seem to stop themselves. And just like, I have been speaking about chemical addiction for a long time, but there are very, very close parallels between chemical addiction and behavioral addictions, because behavioral addiction could include gambling, but could also include addiction to pathological relationships. There's such a thing as sexual addictions, where people become addicted to sex. And it leads to promiscuity, it leads to shaming, it leads to the destruction of families, because there are sometimes spouses who are involved in triangular relationships, and engages in infidelity as a result of their addiction to sex. And even though they see their families crumbling, the children are going astray, they can't seem to stop themselves. And a lot of people do not understand that gambling is a mental disorder. It has been recognized. So one of the definitions of gambling as an addiction, it is also known as compulsive gambling, is a gambling disorder, is a behavioral addiction characterized by the uncontrollable urge to gamble despite negative consequences. And another definition of the American Psychiatric Association regards gambling as a mental health disorder, and it involves persistent and recurrent problematic gambling behavior that leads to significant impairment or distress. And I have been seeing quite a number of people in my practice here who have been brought by spouses, by relatives, by parents. Young people are gambling, older people. In fact, it's almost an epidemic in some of the developed countries, where a lot of these old people now who have a lot of times on their hand, they literally live in the casinos, in the gaming houses. I had the chance on my last visit to Florida to go to one of their very popular casinos, the Hard Rock, with a friend, a relative actually. And there are people there literally sleeping on themselves only to wake up and go on back on the slot machines. And there was an instance I recall in the United States where a son actually took the parents to court because he claimed they were frittering away his inheritance by gambling it away. So this is not something that is only peculiar to young people, or it cuts across all age groups, demographies, ethnicities, and it is a behavior that one, especially when you have economic problems in a country, and we have seen that in Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of people think that they can gamble and they can supplement their income. I have had another relative who told me that, if he didn't gamble, he couldn't pay his workers. I mean, that is such a far-fetched idea. To my mind, it even borders in fantasy. How you can ever think that you can literally gamble with such confidence that you will be able to, realize sufficient money to meet your wage demand at the end of the week. It shows the kind of weird thinking that accompanies gambling. And I'm saying all of these because a lot of people who are not involved will also find it very strange. But there's a lot of, I would say, strange behaviors. There are people who believe that they have a particular kind of shirt, a color that makes them more lucky. There's those people who walk with all kinds of little gizmos in their pocket, a favorite a coin, lucky charms, some people with rabbit foot, some people with all kinds of things. And then there are those who believe their lucky days are Wednesday or Thursdays, or, all kinds of belief systems that accompany this that could lead to a mental disorder, to maladaptive behavior. As I say this, I also remembered a young child, not living in my community in the past, where somebody spread the little rumor that when he dreams the numbers accurately, he dreams the marks, and this was for playway. So a lot of people, neighbors, would go and ask him what he dreamt last night. And when they won, he also felt like he was a celebrity. But then when they started to lose, he became the butt of shame and blame and all of that. So, you know, I have a lot of stories I can tell about this. I remember giving a lady a drop from Valencia from Komodo really into Valencia. She was going to shop, and we were having a conversation, and she was describing how she had a bag full of bottles, and she was going to sell it and then play a mark, and she was going to wait until the mark was declared around lunchtime, and then she would take the money from that and then buy groceries to come home. I mean, I admire the confidence these people have, but I also am aware from my experience of the pitfalls of those things, the disappointment, the you cannot plan and sustain a plan depending on the proceeds of gambling. I mean, the fact that the National Lotteries Control Board, the casinos are extending and progressing and declaring so much profits at the end of the year, it means that somebody is losing. That's the only way they could win. But each individual is saying, no, it's not going to be me. Everybody else is going to lose. I am not going to lose. And the mind is like this. We tend to only remember when we win. Because it is so pain, all those times that we lost was so painful, we deliberately keep them out of our conversations and hope that they will vanish away from our memory. So that every time you speak to a person who is gambling, they will tell you about all the glorious times, how the last time they won and how much they won, how little they invested. And a lot of money that goes into gambling could have been put to other, important expenditures in terms of savings, in terms of children's education, in terms of medicines. And this is an addiction just like cocaine, marijuana, and all of those. So the behavior is the same. I was working with a Dr. Austin who went off to Ireland, but we were working on a study to show that there were physiological symptoms in gambling that resemble the same as as chemical addiction, because the person, when they put the bet, they they um they have expectation, and the adrenaline level starts to go up when the time is coming to declare the result of the punt, the gambling, the money you bet. And there is a depression after, even if you win. There's still a withdrawal symptoms associated with the high that you receive, the adrenaline that was pumped up to the time of the declaration of the bet. So that there is that high and low and high and low, and that that kind of experience that one experience, similar to when you take a drink or you take a drug and you get high, and when it is wearing away. So that it should not be treated casually. It should, people. Now, let me say this at the outset. I have no problem with people who gamble, like I don't have a problem with people who drink if it is not causing problems in your life. However, these addictions are addictions of denial. And the person who is addicted seeks to justify it all the time and rationalize. And they are not willing to admit when it is actually causing a problem. And as a result, they do not get help until they reach way into the depths of addiction, to the point where I have had instances where I know people who have actually committed suicide because they were so deep into gambling now. They had been taking people's money, taking loans. I know one person was gambling as a stockbroker with people's shares. And when it came to the crunch and he could not redeem the people's money to give them back, he committed suicide. Young, bright person that I knew. So this is a serious thing this morning, and I would want to go in the second part into dealing with some of the actual symptoms, and hopefully before the end of the program suggest some alternatives that one could use to get out of this addiction. So at this point, we'll take a little break, go back to the station for a few messages, and then when we come back to the program, we'll go into the nitty-gritty of gambling as an addiction.